Very excited to have you guys here today because your movie gave me a panic attack.
Your fear of AI is the collapse of humanity.
Well, not the collapse, the abrupt extermination.
So I'd love to talk about, I'm here actually today to just as an intervention to you all for affecting me.
I'm so sorry.
Well, no, I think it's structured that way though. I'd love to have you talk about that specifically because I truly do feel like, so it starts off the AI doc or how I became an apocaloptimist.
Nice, got it.
I've been practicing. It's like, it starts off with kind of Daniel's spiral into panicking about AI and then kind of looking at the worst aspects of it, but then kind of trying to look to the other side of like what people are saying, like, oh, but all the great things we could. And it really did feel like the process of a panic attack where you're spiraling and being like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Well, maybe good things could happen. And then you have to like sit down and rationalize.
Yeah.
I've been through cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love this.
Get your reps in. Yeah.
So like when planning a documentary that's like going to be about AI, that's a huge thing. How did you guys come to this structure for it?
It was a couple things, and this is end of summer, early fall 2023 that we all kind of came together. And the two big parts were how do we make this accessible for people and take this giant topic and present it in a way that's going to allow people to understand, comprehend it, and hopefully find the same answers that we were looking for. And the second thing, which was pretty paramount, was the evergreen version of the story. The news cycles of the AI landscape are sometimes hours. Look at Sam Altman being ousted by his board. We almost moved towards that as a story subject. And then 48 hours later, good thing we didn't spend any resources on capturing that. Yeah. And so with that, it was, what are the ways, that we as filmmakers had to take big steps back. And then also it was a zoom in, zoom out the whole time, the tiniest detail and the tiniest nuance of the space, and also zooming out and looking at the big broad landscape to try to find that story.
There's sort of a meta element also just in the way that we all as people, like where this story meets us, which is typically, you mentioned that, Daniel, in the case of the story, he becomes aware of it, and then he becomes aware of potential negative outcomes and potential positive outcomes. And I'm not sure if you have the same algorithm I do, but it's typically the stories are AI is going to kill everybody, it's going to take all our jobs, or it's going to cure cancer and it's going to solve climate change. And so to be able to reconcile with the fact that those headlines will always be changing, but the thematic sort of tidal wave that we're all swept up in is broadly telling you AI very, very bad, AI very, very good.
Right.
And then the rest of the movie is sort of trying to present in a really accessible way, what the hell do we do with that? And how do we move forward?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you compare it to a panic attack is very, I won't say funny, but it is interesting. You
can say funny. You can laugh at my mental illness. It's fine. I do.
I mean, I think for a lot of people, there are three camps. There are the people who are really excited about this. There are people who are really, really scared and mad about this. And then there's the people in the middle who don't want to even be bothered by it. They're putting their heads in the sand because it's such a big, overwhelming topic. And this film is meant to kind of guide you through the psychological journey as well as the educational journey of accepting the fact that like this technology is here and no one really knows what the future is going to bring, because in some ways what we realized, and this was not intentional, is like it almost feels like going through the stages of grief as well, because what you're grieving is not necessarily like, oh, the world's going to end, but right. This version of the world is ending, and even without AI, if you look out the headlines right now, it's like clearly something is shifting, something big is happening, and AI is a part of it, but it's not the whole thing. And this film in some ways is also a guided experience where you and an audience get to go on the stages of saying goodbye to the world in the future that you thought you were going to be, living in. And especially in the case of this story, it's a story about a director who discovers he's about to become a father for the first time.
Is now a terrible time to have a kid.
I mean, I'll just be honest. I know people who work on AI risk who don't expect their children to make it to high school.
And so he's grieving the future he thought his son was going to grow up in as well. And so we felt that was very relatable, but also kind of had a social utility too, because if we can all kind of go through that rite of passage together, maybe on the other side of it, we can actually move towards action.
Yeah.
It sounds like maybe we got the anxiety a little too sharp on you, but we can pull it back for different people.
Recut the movie for me specifically.
I mean,
no, but
we can try.
I actually think it's a really positive thing because like, I think I am someone who, because of my job, am like aware of AI stuff, but also like only kind of like in headlines and broad strokes because that's what I'm getting. And I do think there's a part of me that was like, I don't want to engage with this because I find it kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
And this confronts that, but also because it confronts the psychological aspect of it, I didn't feel like I was being talked down to. I didn't feel like I was being sold something. So it allowed me to actually experience this discourse in a way I previously wouldn't allow myself.
That's amazing. What a great review. Thank you. That was our goal.
So yes,
honestly.
and your panic attack metaphor that as somebody who you know has
Dabbled.
well, somebody, yeah, in terms of when one is having a panic attack, there's an exercise called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise where you will ground yourself in reality and you look for 5 things that you can see and you'll name those. You'll look at 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can smell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think, yes, and in your metaphor, the way that we get through this is not by being swept up in the hyperobject that is AI. It's rather to look around us and figure out what are the ways that we can ground each other. So interacting with other people, realizing that we actually do have a tremendous amount of agency and that we are the expert in our individual domains, whether you're a truck driver or a nurse or a teacher or a parent, that the question you really need to ask yourself when facing this issue really boils down to, what do I care most about? What are my values? And how do I find community with other people who share those values? So that way, you know, when AI or any technology is encroaching upon the life that you live and hold dear, how do you align with other people to protect those things? You know, so that kind of grounding in what's here and what's real is critically important.
Yeah, I think that's also part of it where so much of the AI conversation, like I mostly talk with filmmakers because I'm an entertainment person. That's what I do. And I ask about like AI in Hollywood, and like we will circle back to that because I want to hear more about your coalition. But it becomes this thing where people keep telling me like AI is already here. AI is not going to leave. But it's like a question of what are they trying to sell you is how I feel about it a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. And I think that conversation often means that just a layperson like myself feels like I don't have a choice in AI, that it's people above me that are going to make those decisions and I'm going to be left with what they decide. And what I thought was so fascinating about the film is it addresses that fear and that possibility, but also, as you said, talks about like touching base, even in like the animation, the flipbook animation between Daniel and his wife, where it's like literally somebody being like, okay, pause. Which like is, I think that's another acronym for another anxiety thing. It's been a while since I've looked at those notes, but like it's a similar idea where it's like you have to like stop and actually assess.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I still use the language of like, hey, this technology is here, is because I don't think we can be. We have to be really sober about the reality of the fact that the technology, the capabilities are here. How it's being deployed is the thing that isn't inevitable, and that's what we really need to be critical on and pushing back against, because the default path of how it's being implemented and developed is not a good one, right? I'm not afraid of this technology on its own. I'm afraid of this technology in this current system and with these current incentives.
Where it's like that very, like the accelerist path seems to be that very kind of Silicon Valley theory of like break stuff, figure it out later.
Yes, yeah, which is obviously like not going to be good, I think, based on the past 10, 20 years of what happened when we allow Silicon Valley to set the terms for our world. And we kind of took our hands off the steering wheel and said, you guys are the expert, we'll let you guys guide us. And what we really need to be doing as a society is like, it doesn't really matter if you're like really excited about this technology or really terrified of this technology. We still need to do the difficult nuanced surgery of defining what types of expressions of this technology are exploitative and extractive versus nourishing and humane in some way. And right now, like, even though I'm saying this technology is inevitable here, I don't think the version of it that is here is the one that we should accept, and we should actually be actively pushing back against it.
One case study, just in terms of what the simplest form of agency that one can act is if you look at how, Anthropic was, ousted by I'll say the Department of Defense, just as my personal preference. And then OpenAI announces that they have a deal on Friday. They get 1.5 million people who leave their paid subscription base. And on Monday, or even before Monday, Sam Altman reverses course. And that's one of the things where even just voting with your dollars, it's sort of one of the real goals of the film is to remind people that just in your individual domains, you don't need to quit your job and dedicate your entire life to this issue if you don't want to.
Right.
It is in every single very small way, these little collective actions actually can signal what our values are and where we do want the technology to go. And the other important part of it is that it's really important to not conflate the notion of the technology being here with the technology working exactly as advertised by the labs. And this is sort of where we get into the hype conversation, because one of the very scariest things about the technology is that, by and large, and the film tries, and I think successfully, based off of the MAGA family members that have seen the film, who don't find that it is a partisan film. Like it's very important that the film is nonpartisan completely, because this affects everyone.
Right.
But one of the things that I think that whether you're a libertarian or whether or not you're part of what I would say is the actual radical left, as opposed to what's called the radical left, if you really are fighting every day, is, when you look at footage out of Minnesota or things where these ICE rallies, there's always a guy in the background from ICE who has a camera, and he's taking biometric scans of the people, and that's going into a database that it would almost be better if the 1984 state that they're building worked perfectly, because it actually, what we're getting is what I would call is like dumb 1984, where the technology that they are
Someone
using.
who just read the Spark Notes version.
Well, it's more that I think there's a temptation when you're in power to believe that the story, that the technology works perfectly.
Yeah.
Because then when you're creating your panopticon and your perfect surveillance state, there's not any accidents.
Right.
What we're actually getting is, and this affects everyone regardless of what your ideology is or what your background is. There's a story in Florida of a guy who's just at a McDonald's, and he got picked up because of a facial scan hit where he was then taken to a different county and locked up over a weekend as a child sex offender because of a face scan hit. And that's those.
Tuttle Buttle.
What's that?
Brazil.
What?
The movie Brazil.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that is dumb 1984. Yeah, that's great.
Oh, I know it's dumb 1984, or there's another writer who I spoke to who refers to it as Idiocracy Handmaid's Tale, which is a whole different thing. But I thought you said that Tuttle Buttle was the guy. I thought you were implying that was the guy's name. And I was like, if this guy's name was Tuttle Buttle, that needs to be the headline. That's why the story
it would become a much more memed story if his name was Tuttle Buttle.
Just to stick the landing on that point is that it is, if we believe the story that they're telling us,
right,
then there are many, many things that can go wrong as a result of just believing that hype. So it's really important to not take this at face value. But
it's also, again, with everything, it's just gray all the way down. There's no black and white. And so on the one hand, do not believe their hype, but on the other hand, do not underestimate the technology too. It's it's like we're about to move into a world, and we already are in that world. It's just like not many people are waking up to it, where everything is paradox.
Yeah.
Nothing makes sense, right? Yeah. And so to believe that this is both highly capable and incredibly stupid at the same time is important, because it's a different kind of creature than us. And by the way, we are also incredibly capable and incredibly stupid too. And so being able to hold that paradox is going to be really important, because I do think underestimating the technology could also lead to certain problems as well.
Well, I want to speak a little bit to that, because you're part of the Creators Coalition of AI, one of the founding members.
Yes.
And I'd like to talk a little bit about what the goals are for that, because we've seen a lot of the press releases. Mm-hmm. And I talked to a lot of filmmakers about, like, what is your fear around AI? What do you see the future of AI being in Hollywood? And I'm curious what your perspective on that is in this moment.
Yeah. So one of the things that I realized while working on this movie, we've been working on it for a few years now, is watching Silicon Valley and just talking to all the experts and seeing how quickly that industry is moving versus our industry, where a lot of people are paralyzed, or a lot of people are having conversations underground because it's such a polarized topic. They're afraid to get it wrong. And so a lot of inaction, a lot of gridlock, nothing is really happening. What happens if we do nothing and Silicon Valley continues to grow? They will begin to set the terms for how media is created and how stories are told and how our craft is interacting with the rest of the world, and we can't let them set the terms for our industry again. And so one of the most important things that the Creators Coalition can do is help cut through a lot of the fear and the bullshit and the sort of the discoordination problem that we have. We're calling ourselves like a sense-making organization, where how do we make sure that we can help our industry see the problem together, not in this very fractured way where some people, like, all they care about is this part. Like, some people, like, environment's the only thing that matters to them. Some people, it's the copyright stuff. That's the only thing that matters to them. Some people, for them, it's just like, I just want to be able to create. I finally, the gatekeepers and the money, like, I could never make movies. Now I finally can. And that's the only thing that matters to them.
Right.
Everyone it's like a Tower of Babel. Everyone's talking past each other, and there's no real there's no movement because of that. And so what we're going to do with the Creators Coalition is to first create a platform using a lot of old and new coordination technologies, I guess you could call them, in-person town halls, in-person civic assemblies, different like polls, old school polls, and also some newer polls using newer technologies that other countries have been using to great effect to speed up the democratic process, to see if we can help hold up a mirror to the audience, to our industry and to the creative community at large, to understand what we actually value together, where we agree, and where our red lines are, so that we can then essentially build a roadmap towards institutionalizing some of this stuff, so that we're the ones setting the terms for how this technology is used, not the tech companies, and not just and not allowing it to be the wild west. Because right now with the wild west, what we get is, I mean, so many things. I can't even list them all. But the 4 pillars that we're worried about are like, first, it's jobs. What are we doing about jobs, and how do we make sure that no matter what version the future brings, that everyone is taken care of, and how do we speak to that? The next thing is sort of the data dignity and the copyright of it all. I know a lot of people outside of this industry, or a lot of people who aren't copyright owners, think that this is not that important of a deal. But to me, everyone in the world, we have had our copy, our it's not even copywritten. It's our data has been taken and stolen and used, no matter who you are, your home videos, your blog posts, if you're a journalist, if you're a writer. And we need to have some very real conversations about what that looks like for us in the future. The next thing is sort of guardrails against misuse, and how do we build systems of accountability. This technology right now is being used to fake videos around ICE, around Iran, around Venezuela. If you look at these videos online, a lot of people are getting faked or being tricked by these fake videos. We as an industry cannot in good conscience enable the tech industry to continue just to irresponsibly
create misinformation like
that. Or to
stupid 1984
to enable
things.
It's like to enable people to do that. They made a decision to release this technology. None of us were prepared for it, and it fundamentally made it so that we can no longer believe what we see anymore. And that's like a massive loss. We cannot just pretend that didn't happen and just continue to give them business.
From our perspective, we try on site to be like, here are the ways to tell something's AI, and we've had to stop updating it because it moves too fast. The article is immediately not
every
useful
single tell is
quickly eradicated.
Exactly.
And it's just getting harder and harder to explain to my mom, no, that's not a real story.
And then the last thing that we're really worried about is sort of the industrialization of imagination and the industrialization of creativity, giving up and automating a part of the human experience and the human spirit. What did the industrialization of food do to our bodies and to our planet, right? Yes, we got a lot of abundance, but at what cost?
Right.
If we could go back in time and act and find a more nuanced way to know, which of these capabilities we should be accepting into our systems and which of the ones we should be saying no to. I believe that is the conversation we need to be having at large when it comes to creativity, imagination, and just like critical thinking and intelligence at large. Like, how much of that are we going to give up to machines, and what is that effect going to have on us, as a planet? So that's kind of what we're trying to. It's very big and very lofty, but I believe every industry needs to be doing this, and we all need to be working together. The teachers need to be doing this for education, doctors need to be doing this for medicine, and eventually we all have to be kind of weaving together as a human project to say, hey, big tech, you guys have a lot. You have a lot to reckon with, and you have a lot to do to rebuild our trust in what you guys are doing. And until they can do that, I think we should be breaking up with big tech. Honestly, this is not a Creators Coalition stance. This is not from the doc. This is just my personal stance.
Yeah,
we need to be breaking up with big tech and building parallel structures that are not beholden by corporations when it comes to communication and media and AI.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, I think about that a lot. I will say mostly previously in social media, because it's so frustrating that like these have become spaces where you can build a community, but also where a community can become very isolated because of the way these systems are in place.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's been an ongoing conversation with me and like colleagues of mine and friends of mine about like, oh, well, this person did like this exec did this, so I'm going to leave this site. And like, I get that, but also at a certain point, how much digital ground are we giving up?
Yes.
How much space are we ceding to people that don't care about us? And like, it's, I think that's, it's a real difficulty that I think does extend to AI. And just like, it's, an interesting thing where like, I feel like even the documentary addresses like the basic question of like, what is AI? Because I feel like that term is getting used to paper such a wide swath of what that it's just like, the word thing covers literally, like that's where it feels like we're at. So can you give us what you feel like your definition of AI is?
I'll steal it from one of our subjects, which is it's just a marketing term right now. It's a term that's used to define kind of like how social media has a whole bunch of things under what that is. AI has multiple things underneath that. And it's used to make it seem like this big monumental thing that, you either have to be on the boat or off the boat, and you need to participate in with it because it's where things are going. And it's
Right.
that kind of feeling of pace, and that feeling that brings out kind of anxiety and brings out a feeling
Like,
of
get
a
on
need
board
to
or get the
engage with
fuck
it.
out.
Yeah, it's and like the Industrial Revolution and the industrialization of things like creativity and things like personally, I'm a slow time guy. Like, I kind of really resent some of the landscape of filmmaking right now, which is in some ways my own insecurities, but just the pace at which I feel as a filmmaker and artist, I have to be creating and making an output, when that's not probably the timeline. Going back to what you were talking about earlier, CBT, like, I had to understand my own pace, and it doesn't mean I'm slow. It just means I have to go at a different pace than the rest of the world is going to tell me to
That's
go.
real. That's
Yeah.
real. Everyone's got different seasons, especially for creative stuff. But Karen Howe, one of our subjects, the way she talks about the definitions of AI is like, it's kind of like talking about transportation and be like, are you for transportation or against transportation? But really, there's like, there's cars, bikes, and trains, and buses, and planes. There's so many different ways of doing it. And each of those things have its role, and each of those things maybe have a different scales of how much proportions we should be using. Maybe we should be driving less and walking more. Maybe we should be doing less private jets. But like, we can't just say because private jets exist, all of it's gone. And we have to have this very nuanced conversation, because if we don't, then the people who aren't willing to have a nuanced conversation but really care about the important things about what they want to protect, they're not going to be in the conversation. They're not going to be a part of the conversation because they aren't actually engaging in good faith. And we need those people to be participating, because their voice and what they care about is the stuff I care about. All the stuff that I want to protect, they want to protect. And we really are, this movie is meant to be a way to encourage people to come into the conversation and say, hey, this is a massive dialogue, and you cannot disengage. You can't put your head in the sand, and you can also you can't just hold on to one version of what you believe and expect to have a productive conversation. And so, yeah, for now, it feels like the Tower of Babel a little bit when you talk about AI. When I say AI, each of you, everyone in this room has a different thing in their head that they're imagining. And just to bring it back to the coalition for a little bit, one of the things that we realized early on is when you talk about AI use within filmmaking, even, that's really confusing, because I've been using Adobe After Effects for like 15, 20 years now. And there's a lot of AI tools, machine learning tools that they've been
Which you didn't ask for.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they're there. And
you never asked for it, but also it's been part of the software since I was in high school in some ways. Like Lord of the Rings was using like crowd simulations back in the early 2000s. Like, we have to be really clear about the definitions and build standards of definitions and definitions of use cases. Otherwise, we're never going to get past the especially when it comes to right now, we're about to enter a bunch of negotiations within our industry. How are we supposed to negotiate around AI if we don't have standards of definitions and use cases? And so one of the things that Creators Coalition is trying to do, and I think a lot of people in a lot of industries are trying to do right now, is just table setting a standard of how what the language we use. If we can standardize that first, then we can decide which versions of it and we actually want to be saying no to, and which versions of it we're okay with. And that needs to be a collective conversation. It can't just be up to the studios. It can't just be up to the tech industry. And so again, that's one of the reasons why we're bringing together hopefully some civic assemblies and things like that, so that people can be a part of that conversation.
That's part of what I enjoyed so much about the film, because I feel like the film doesn't feel like a lecture, because it doesn't feel like in the end you guys are saying this is what to do, this is what you should feel. Because I actually got in an argument with a colleague last night about whether the film is pro AI or not, which I thought was really interesting. I'm so excited for people to see this movie. Is there anything in particular you guys want people to understand before they go into it?
Before they go in, interesting. That it's entertaining, like that it's and it's
anxiety
approachable.
Attack aside, I agree with this.
Well, so my 78-year-old dad has literally never owned a laptop. I think in his life, he's a lifelong conservative fella, and we watched it in a log cabin together. And he divides all movies into two categories, which are movies and think movies. And he does not. This may be one of the first think movies that he's watched voluntarily. But there was a moment where 40 minutes into it, he said, wow, like he was captivated by it. And at the end of it, I asked him a bunch of open-ended questions, and he was able to explain how the technology worked. He was able to extrapolate because he had built the film allowed him to build intuitions on where it's going. He was able to talk about specifically in his domain of his life what he was hopeful for, what he was concerned about, and he also gave really good archive notes, which was very funny. we took his notes, but it's really the thing. Charlie and Daniel, I think, did such an amazing job. Specifically, Charlie in incorporating this very handmade feel. Like it's a film that when you watch it, in many ways, we understood that. When you talk about like eating your vegetables, like saying, hey, do you want to go watch this documentary about AI? We understood going in that basically the subtext of any conversation I've had in the last 3 years with somebody who's outside of tech is, please tell me the one thing about AI so that I never have to think or talk about it ever again. And unfortunately, one of the things you all know Harari says in the movie is like, it's a relationship. Yeah. Like my favorite quote in the film is fundamentally, this is not a question about AI specifically. It's a question of how do we build a society that can co-evolve with stronger and stronger technologies, because that's what we have to do.
And for what you were saying about, you had a friend who, the argument about whether it's pro AI or not, that kind of result is a subjective thing. Right. There are people who will see it through a certain lens and feel the film is one thing. Many people feel it's a complete doomer take on AI. So that's really interesting.
And that conversation, the fact that you had that conversation with they start talking to each other. So that's like,
I mean, that's one, to answer your question, like what's something they should know going in, watch it with other people.
Yes.
Every time we've done a screening, people have been really grateful for that, because when you're done, you want to talk. Whether you hate the movie or love the movie, you're going to want to talk to people. And I think that's actually the point of this movie. This movie, we kind of set out to make a movie knowing that we were going to piss off a lot of people, mostly because we're including a lot of opinions that don't feel clean. So like the doomers were mad that we included the accelerationists in the movie, and the accelerationists were mad that we included, and so like no matter, like if you come in with a preconceived idea of what AI is, you're going to be upset by something about this movie. And I think that's actually really important, because the one thing we can't do, the mistake we can't repeat with this, is we cannot allow this to become a polarized conversation, because when we're fighting, the people with money and power who are in charge of this thing, they get to do whatever they want. We cannot allow that to happen with AI. And the good news is, at least on the left-right spectrum, there is this massive consensus that we need to be doing something to regulate this stuff. And so one thing I hope people go into this movie is like, this movie is not about picking sides. In fact, the movie is about finding where is the consensus? How do we how do we hold this thing together? How do we make sure we don't kind of repeat the same mistakes of the past? Like, I'm actually really curious. I know we're running out of time. What was the debate like between you and your colleague? I want to hear.
It got cut off, admittedly, because it is the South by a way of things, so we kind of got. But they were very much like, well, the documentary is very pro AI. I was like, that is an interesting take, because I don't think it is. I don't think I wouldn't have called it pro AI, but I also don't think it's anti AI, and that was what I thought was so interesting. Is I came out being like, it definitely challenged some ideas I had about it, but I wouldn't be able to put a stamp on it. And she was very firm.
But that's kind of, so this is the kind of mindset, and I don't want to rebuke your colleague, because I totally get it. We have been Bane was born into darkness. We were born into brain rot, right? The algorithm has made it impossible for people to see anything nuanced and be like, I can accept this. The fact that your friend saw it and was like, this is 100% pro AI, whereas I was talking to another interviewer the other day where he's like, I am so depressed by this and I hate AI because your movie made me so like whatever. So he saw it as the exact opposite. He completely saw it as like anti-AI. We got to rally and push back against it. We have to move past the brain rot discourse and the brain rot
that you're on one side or the other.
That you're on one side or the other, or that like because things don't fit cleanly into a box, into certain talking points, that we have to reject it. Purity, politics, all of that stuff, we have to throw that away so that we can have, because like the problem right now within our industry and the world is we can't have productive conversations because all of them are just
because we've fallen into the social media internet speak.
100%. And so again, the Creators Coalition, and I hope other people are following suit, it's trying to create safe spaces for us to say what we really believe, but know that it's going to be received in good faith. Because I think the problem is if we aren't saying what we really believe, then we're not actually having creative conflicts that are going to be generative. In fact, all we're doing is we're having destructive conflict. We have to move away from the destructive conflict and move into the sharpening that like really gets, and I say this as someone who's a co-director, me and my other director, we fight all the time, and we have to really be careful and be aware of when our conflict is being destructive versus constructive.
Right.
And if we can't do that together, then we will lose. Big tech will win. They will get to just make all the decisions for us. And so I really encourage your friend to listen to this, and to kind of like check yourself. Like we should all be checking ourselves because everyone has blind spots. I've changed my mind on AI hundreds of times over the course of making this movie. Every time I think I know the solution, every time I think I know the answer of how to talk about it, I'm humiliated, or the rug is pulled, or I'm forced to change my mind. And if you are not constantly changing your mind about this, then you're not actually paying attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to your point, when you talk about the notion of sharpening, that to me, there's a thing you've said a number of times which I love, which is right now it's such an emotionally charged issue, and there's such a stunning lack of clarity that when you combine an emotional amplitude with no clear way to talk about things, it always is going to lead to friction. And to me, one of the most important things that it's stressed in the film is that if, there's a temptation to want to believe that we can build the good AI and not the bad AI, but it is inseparable. You cannot get the promise without the peril. And as a result of that, we need to be coordinating with each other and having these good faith dialogues, so that way we can actually progress as a society, because it is not only going to be one thing. And if we pretend that it is or that it could be, then we get divided and conquered. Like at any time that you are not adjusting what your norms are and actually listening to somebody who in good faith is trying to figure out a solution that benefits humanity, we are being played. Because the people who are going to continue to benefit are the people who are able to maintain power and control because of our division.
To answer your original question, like that's what I personally really hope for the film, is that this is something that requires engagement, and this is something that requires a conversation. And that might be one time that you do it in your life, or it might be something that you really begin to participate in and put in your efforts to sway the direction of what we do with this technology. But that's the goal, is that this is going to be, our cheap expression is it's a first date with AI for a lot of people. So that's the biggest hope as a filmmaker on this team, is that we can start getting people out there and engaging.
This is the last mistake we'll ever get to make.